The morning of the royal wedding arrived like something out of a dream. The Palace of Ironvale stood tall against a pale blue sky, its stone towers wrapped in climbing white flowers that the royal gardeners had spent 3 weeks planting by hand. Every hallway inside smelled of fresh roses. Every window was polished until the glass caught the early light and threw small rainbows across the marble floors. Hundreds of guests moved through the grand corridors in their finest clothes, speaking in low, excited voices, brushing shoulders with dukes and pack lords and noble families who had traveled from every corner of the kingdom just to be present for this one day. It was the kind of morning that felt important before anything had even happened. Caelum Drevon stood in a small room off the main hall, letting his attendants fasten the last buttons of his ceremonial coat. He was tall and broad, with dark eyes that most people found difficult to meet for very long. He had ruled the Ironvale Dominion for 9 years. He had fought in 36 battles and had never lost a single one. He was 31 years old, and he had never once, in all those years, done anything simply because he wanted to. Everything had always been about what the kingdom needed. Today was no different. Lady Seraphine Ashford stood waiting for him at the altar, a brilliant, composed woman from one of the kingdom's oldest noble families. She was kind enough, in her reserved way. She was strategic and capable and politically perfect. The council had selected her, and Caelum had agreed, because that was what kings did. They agreed to things that were right for the realm, even when those things felt hollow. He had never spoken this thought out loud. He barely allowed himself to think it. He looked at himself in the tall mirror his attendants held up, adjusted the silver clasp at his collar, and told himself what he always told himself, that duty was enough, that it had to be. Then he walked out to get married. The great hall was breathtaking. White candles burned in rows along the center aisle, and thousands of tiny lights had been strung overhead so that the ceiling glittered like a night sky. The guests rose as Caelum entered, and the room filled with the kind of reverent silence that only comes when people know they are watching something historic. Seraphine stood at the altar in a silver gown that caught every candle flame and scattered the light softly across the room. She looked, by any measure, remarkable. She gave Caelum a small, composed smile as he reached her side, and he returned it the same way, controlled, appropriate, correct. The officiant began to speak. Caelum listened. He kept his expression neutral. He was very good at appearing present, even when something inside him was far away, and right now, that hollow feeling in his chest, the one he had carried so long he had almost stopped noticing it, was louder than usual. He breathed through it, the way he breathed through everything, and focused on the words being spoken in front of him. He was 3 minutes into the ceremony when one of his personal guards appeared at the side door. The man moved quietly and carefully, the way trained guards do when they have something urgent to deliver, but cannot interrupt directly. He caught the eye of Caelum's most senior advisor, leaned close, and whispered something. The advisor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He crossed the room at a careful, unhurried pace, and leaned toward the king's ear. "Your Majesty," the advisor murmured, "there is a woman at the gates. She arrived alone, on foot. She is asking for nothing, but she will not leave. And the guards say, she says the bond brought her." Caelum did not move. He stood completely still at the altar while the officiant continued speaking, and in the next 3 heartbeats, something happened that he could not explain and could not stop. It started as a warmth. A deep, sudden warmth in the center of his chest, where the emptiness had always lived. And then it was more than warmth. It was a pull, a recognition, a door swinging open somewhere inside him that he had not even known was closed. It was so sudden and so total that his breath caught for a moment, and he had to grip the edge of the altar with one hand to keep himself steady. The officiant was still speaking. Seraphine had noticed. She was watching him with the careful attention of someone who has learned to read a person well, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop mid-sentence, her vow hanging unfinished in the warm candlelit air. The hall went quiet in that particular way, where 1,000 people all hold their breath at once. And then, Caelum Drevon stepped back from the altar. He did not rush. He did not speak. He simply turned and walked, steadily, quietly, with the same controlled manner he brought to everything, straight down the center aisle, past his stunned guests, and out through the grand doors. Outside, the morning air was cool and sharp. Caelum crossed the stone courtyard quickly, his coat catching the breeze, 4 guards falling into step behind him before he waved them back with one hand. He wanted no escort for this. He did not fully know why. At the iron gates, surrounded by 2 palace guards who were doing their professional best to appear calm, stood a young woman. She was not what he expected, though he realized immediately that he had not known what to expect. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair that had clearly been pinned up neatly at the start of her journey and had gradually come loose over many miles of travel. She wore a plain, dark traveling coat, worn at the elbows, and her boots were dusty in the specific way that spoke of long roads and no carriages. She was not dressed for a palace. She was not dressed to impress anyone. She stood straight, though. He noticed that immediately. She was clearly tired. It was visible in the set of her shoulders, the slight heaviness around her eyes, but she held herself with a quiet steadiness that he found, without expecting to, deeply familiar. She saw him coming, and did not look away. Most people looked away from Caelum when he walked toward them with purpose. She held his gaze with the calm expression of someone who has already decided to be honest, whatever the consequences. He stopped a few feet from her. The pull in his chest was extraordinary. He had heard the mate bond described before, in old accounts and quiet conversations, but no description had come close to this. This sense of immediate, unmistakable knowing, as though some part of him recognized her in a way that had nothing to do with having met before. They had not met before. He was certain of that. "You walked here," he said. It was not the most impressive opening, but it was the truest thing he could think of. He could see the road on her, 3 days of it at least. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. "From Ashborder?" She did not ask how he knew. "Yes." He studied her face. "You know what day this is?" "I know," she said. She took a slow breath. "I did not come to cause trouble. I want you to understand that. I don't fully understand why I came. I only know that 3 days ago, something pulled me west, and would not stop, and I could not. I could not make myself not come." Caelum was silent for a moment. He thought about what it meant, that she had walked 3 days on the pull of a bond she had not asked for, toward a palace, where a king she had never met was marrying another woman. She had not dressed to impress him. She had not come with demands or rehearsed speeches. She had simply followed the only honest thing she knew how to follow, and then stood at the gate and told the truth about it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Marin Solace." He nodded slowly. Then he turned to the nearest guard and said, in a voice that was quiet but left no room for question, "Bring her inside. Give her food, a warm room in the east wing, and anything she needs. No one is to question her presence or make her feel unwelcome." Marin looked at him, and for the first time her composure shifted, just slightly, just enough for him to see that she had not expected this. "Thank you," she said. He met her eyes for one more moment, then he walked back toward the palace. The hall was in quiet chaos when he returned. Guests were murmuring among themselves. Seraphine had withdrawn with her attendants. The council members were clustered in a tight, urgent group near the far wall, their expressions ranging from confused to deeply unhappy. 3 of them moved toward Caelum the moment he re-entered. He held up one hand. They stopped. "Tonight," he said simply. "We speak tonight." It was not a negotiation. They knew it, and they let him pass. He went to his study and closed the door and sat alone for a long time. He thought about 9 years of carrying the weight of the kingdom, as though his own feelings were a small and unnecessary thing. He thought about the word duty, and how he had used it, quietly, to close doors inside himself that perhaps should have stayed open. He thought about a woman who had walked 3 days in worn boots because her heart had pointed her in a direction, and she had been brave enough to follow it, even when the destination made no logical sense. He sat with all of it until the room was dark, and one of his attendants came quietly to light the lamps. In the east wing, Marin sat on a bed larger than any she had slept in her entire life, and ate a simple meal that someone had brought on a tray without a single question asked. The room was warm. Outside the tall window, the palace grounds glowed softly in the early evening light. She thought about her life in Ashborder, The small room she rented above the healer's workshop, the early mornings gathering herbs, the quiet routine she had built carefully out of the rubble of a childhood that had fallen apart when she was 17. She had made something decent out of what remained. She had been, if not happy, at least settled. And then 3 days ago, settled had simply stopped being possible. She set down her fork and looked out the window at the palace gardens below. Somewhere in this building, a king was sitting with the wreckage of his own wedding day and deciding what to do about a stranger who had arrived with nothing but an honest explanation and dusty boots. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know whether the bond between them would be honored or quietly buried under the weight of politics and expectation. She did not know if she was brave enough for whatever came next. What she knew was simpler than all of that. For the first time in 6 years, she was not pretending to be somewhere she belonged. For the first time in 6 years, something inside her that had been quietly, persistently aching had gone still and calm. That had to mean something. The next morning, a palace attendant knocked on her door before sunrise and told her that the king requested her presence in his private study. No advisors, no guards inside, just the two of them. She took her time getting ready, because she believed that being steady was the only real advantage she had in this situation, and she intended to arrive steady. She found him already seated at a small table near the window, 2 cups of tea sitting untouched between them. He looked, in the gray morning light, like a man who had slept very little and thought a great deal. He did not start with pleasantries. "I want to be honest with you," he said, "about what this situation actually is. The council will not accept disruption quietly. There will be pressure, on me, and if you stay, on you. I cannot promise you that any of this will be easy, and it would not be fair to let you stay without understanding that." Marin looked at him across the table. "Is that your way of asking me to leave?" she said. "No," he said. "It is my way of making sure you know the truth before you decide." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands, then back at him. "I rebuilt my life once from very little," she said. "I know how to do hard things. What I have not known, in a long time, is what it feels like to be in a place where I actually belong." She paused. "I would like to find out what that feels like." Something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that someone across a large room would have noticed, but she was close enough to see it. A quiet settling, like a man who has been holding something tightly for a very long time and has just, carefully, let it go. He reached across the table and wrapped his hand around the cup of tea that had been sitting in front of him, long since gone cold, and he did not move to get up. He stayed at the table. And in that small, unspoken moment, no ceremony, no council, no audience, no grand declaration, something between them became real, not finished, not simple, and certainly not without the long and complicated road ahead, but real. And for both of them, after a very long time, that was more than enough to begin.